Get your hands off the merchandise. This isn't a library. You people always think you can just walk in and touch things. Those words were spoken to a woman who, at that moment, was standing quietly in the showroom of Halcourt Luxury Motors in Atlanta, Georgia, wearing a pair of clean but worn sneakers, a faded green jacket, and carrying a canvas tote bag that had seen better days. Her name was Vivienne Okafor. She was 51 years old, and she owned 43% of the parent company that held the dealership's franchise license. But the man behind the counter didn't know that, and he didn't care to find out. If you've ever walked into a room and felt the temperature drop the moment people saw you, not because it was cold, but because of the way they looked at you, then you already understand something about Vivienne that most people in that showroom didn't bother to try to understand. She had driven 40 minutes from her home in Buckhead that afternoon. Not in her car. Her car was in the shop. The 2023 Mercedes S-Class she'd had detailed just the week before. She'd taken an Uber. The driver had dropped her off at the wrong entrance, so she'd walked around the side of the building, past the service bay, and come in through the back door near the detailing station. Her shoes had picked up a thin layer of dust from the parking lot. Her jacket was the one she wore when she didn't feel like impressing anybody. She had a meeting at 3, and figured she'd stop in beforehand, quietly, just to see how the floor was being run. She wasn't supposed to be there that day. That was kind of the point. The showroom was impressive. 30-foot ceilings, Italian marble floors, 3 vehicles on rotating platforms under theatrical lighting. A young couple was being attended to near the back. A salesman in a slim fit suit was showing them the interior of a pearl-white sedan, his voice low and smooth. Near the entrance, a receptionist was arranging brochures on a curved glass desk. Vivienne had walked in, glanced around, and moved toward a charcoal gray coupe on the center platform. She wasn't touching it. She was reading the spec card attached to the door handle, the one that listed the engine output and the optional packages. That was when Derek Mosley appeared. Derek Mosley was the floor manager that afternoon, 29 years old, 2 years into the job, and possessed of the particular confidence that sometimes develops in people who have been told they're good at something before they've had long enough to learn how much they don't know. He was not an unkind man, exactly, but he was the kind of man who made decisions about people in the first 3 seconds of seeing them, and then spent the rest of the conversation proving himself right. He looked at Vivienne. He took in the jacket, the canvas bag, the dusty sneakers, the way she was standing there, reading, not flagging anyone down, not performing the particular body language of someone who wants to be helped and is waiting politely for a salesperson to notice them. He decided, in those 3 seconds, that she was in the wrong place. "Excuse me," he said, walking toward her with a pace that was just slow enough to seem calm and just fast enough to make clear he was not coming over to help. "Can I ask what you're looking for?" Vivienne looked up from the spec card. "Just looking," she said pleasantly. "This is a dealership," Derek said, as if she had missed a sign on the door. "These vehicles start at $112,000. "I know," Vivienne said. Derek paused. Something about her tone, not aggressive, not apologetic, just level, seemed to bother him. "Did someone let you in through the service entrance?" "The back door was open," she said. He looked at the canvas tote. He looked at her shoes. He looked back at her face. "This isn't a library," he said. "You can't just come in here and browse." And then he said it, the thing that would follow him for a long time afterward. "You people always think you can just walk in and touch things." Vivienne didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't do any of the things that Derek, somewhere in the back of his mind, might have been braced for. She simply folded the spec card back into place, adjusted the strap of her canvas tote, and looked at him with the particular calm of someone who has learned, over 51 years, that some battles aren't fought in the moment they begin. "Thank you for your time," she said. She walked out the way she came in. "Before we go any further, let's talk about who Vivienne Okafor actually was." She was born in Columbus, Ohio, the second of 4 children. Her father worked for the post office for 31 years. Her mother taught 3rd grade. They were not wealthy. They were not connected. What they were was consistent. They showed up, they worked, they saved what they could, and they told their children that the world might not always be fair, but that fairness was still worth fighting for. Vivienne had been an indifferent student until she wasn't. Something clicked in her junior year of high school, a business class, of all things, taught by a man named Mr. Aldous Pemberton, who had retired from commercial real estate and come back to teach because, as he told them, he had more money than time and more knowledge than patience. He put a copy of a balance sheet in front of Vivienne and said, "Tell me what this company is worth." She stared at it for a long time, and then she said something that made him set down his coffee. She was right. She went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and paid the rest with work study and a job waitressing on weekends. She got her MBA from Emory. She spent 12 years at a private equity firm in Atlanta, learning how companies were valued and what made them fragile and where the leverage points were. In 2009, during the recession, she left and started her own firm with two partners, a man named Alton Ferris and a woman named Gwen Calloway, both of whom had worked with her at the private equity shop, and both of whom believed in her judgment more than she sometimes believed in it herself. By 2019, Okafor Ferris Capital had made 14 acquisitions, 7 exits. 3 were still in the portfolio. One of those 3 was a holding company called Vantage Automotive Group, which held franchise licenses for 6 luxury dealerships in the Southeast, including one in Atlanta, including Halcourt Luxury Motors. She had not set out to buy it specifically. She had bought the holding company. The dealerships came with it. She had visited each one in the first 18 months, not in a formal capacity, not with a presentation or an entourage, but quietly, the way a doctor sometimes visits a ward without announcing themselves, because that's the only way to see what's actually happening. She had meant to visit Halcourt 6 months earlier. Things had come up. She hadn't gotten to it. That afternoon, she had finally gotten to it. She sat in the Uber on the way to her 3 o'clock meeting and did not think about Derek Mosley. She thought about the spec card. She thought about the coupe's configuration, the base package versus the sport package, whether the dealership was upselling properly, what their accessory attachment rate was, whether the floor staff understood the product well enough to justify the commission structure they were on. These were the things that occupied her on the drive. The 3 o'clock meeting was with her attorney, Bernard Okafor, who had an office downtown. They were going over paperwork. After the meeting, she sat for a while in Bernard's conference room with a cup of coffee and a view of the city, and she thought about what she had seen on the floor that afternoon. Not what had been said to her, what she had seen, the young couple being attended to near the back. The salesman's posture, the spec cards. She had noticed that 2 of them had outdated pricing, which meant someone wasn't maintaining the floor materials properly. The receptionist arranging brochures instead of greeting incoming customers. She made a few notes on her phone then she called Leonard Park, the regional director who oversaw the Atlanta properties. Leonard Park answered on the second ring. "Vivienne, I was going to reach out to you this week. Tell me about Halcourt," she said, a brief pause. "Halcourt's doing okay. Who's the floor manager on weekday afternoons?" But another pause, longer this time. "That would be Derek Mosley, 2 years in. He's been hitting his numbers." "I want a full staffing review on that location," Vivienne said. "Compensation structure, training records, customer complaint history. I want it by end of week." "Sure," Leonard said carefully. "Can I ask what prompted?" "End of week?" Vivienne said. "Thank you, Leonard." She set down the phone. The next morning, at 9:15, a black town car pulled up to the front entrance of Halcourt Luxury Motors. Not the side entrance, not the service bay. The front entrance, where the automatic glass doors swept open and the Italian marble caught the morning light. 3 people got out. Vivienne Okafor was one of them. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, dark slacks, and shoes that were not dusty. The other 2 were Bernard Okafor and a woman named Patricia Ingalls, who was the operations director for Vantage Automotive Group, and who carried a leather portfolio the way some people carry a weapon, with intention. The receptionist at the curved glass desk looked up. Her name was Amber, and she had worked the front desk for 7 months. She took one look at the 3 of them and had the instinct, she would say later, that something significant was happening, though she couldn't have said exactly why. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" "We have a 9:30, Bernard said pleasantly. Amber looked at her appointment screen. There was nothing there. She looked up. "I'm sorry, I don't see." "It was scheduled this morning," Patricia said, and opened her portfolio, and set a document on the desk that had the Vantage Automotive Group letterhead at the top. Amber read the first 3 lines. Then she picked up the phone. Derek Mosley was in the back office, reviewing commission reports when his supervisor, a man named Gary Tuttle, who had managed the location for 11 years, came in with an expression that Derek had never seen on his face before. Gary was not an excitable man. He had seen deals fall through and records broken, and one memorable afternoon when a customer had driven a test vehicle through a display partition. He was steady. He was always steady. He was not steady right now. "There's someone here to see the location," Gary said carefully. "Okay," Derek said, not looking up from his screen. "Derek." Gary's voice had something in it. "The owner is here." Derek looked up. "The owner of the dealership?" "The owner of the holding company," Gary said. "Vivienne Okafor." The name didn't register immediately. It took Derek a moment. A long moment. The kind that feels like watching something fall in slow motion, before he connected the name to a face, and then to a canvas tote bag, and to a worn green jacket, and to a pair of dusty sneakers standing in front of a spec card the previous afternoon. "His face did something up late here," Gary said. "Now, in the showroom." The walkthrough took 2 hours. Vivienne moved through the dealership the way she moved through all of them. Methodically, without drama, asking questions that seemed simple and weren't. She spoke with Amber at Sharp and Observant, and was being wasted arranging brochures. She spoke with 2 of the sales associates, one of whom clearly knew the product line inside and out, and one of whom clearly did not. She noted the outdated pricing on the spec cards, which had apparently been flagged internally 3 weeks ago and not yet corrected. She spent 20 minutes in the service bay talking to the lead technician, a man named Owen Birch, who had been with the company for 9 years, and who had opinions, well-founded, specific, useful opinions, about where the operation was losing efficiency. She was pleasant throughout. She was not warm exactly. That would be the wrong word. She was attentive. She listened in a way that made people feel like what they were saying mattered, which was partly skill and partly genuine, because what they were saying did matter to her. Gary Tuttle accompanied her for most of it, his jaw set, his composure professional, his eyes occasionally cutting toward Derek, who was also present for portions of the walkthrough, and who said very little. At one point, Vivienne stopped in front of the charcoal gray coupe on the center platform, the same one she had been reading the spec card for the previous afternoon. She looked at it for a moment. "This one's been on the floor for how long?" she asked. Patricia checked her portfolio. 63 days, she said. "What's the holdup?" Gary cleared his throat. "It's a specialty configuration. Not a lot of walk-in buyers for this particular. Owen told me there's been 3 serious inquiries in the last month," Vivienne said. "None converted. Do you know why?" Gary did not immediately answer. "Follow-up timing," Patricia said, reading from the portfolio. "First inquiry waited 4 days for a callback." 4 days, Vivienne repeated, not with heat. Just with a particular quality of stillness. That means something has been registered and will not be forgotten. At 11:45, Vivienne, Bernard, and Patricia settled into the manager's conference room for a brief internal session. Gary was invited. Derek was not. What happened in that room was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no ultimatums delivered across the table. Vivienne was not that kind of person, and this was not that kind of meeting. What happened was a clear-eyed accounting of what she had seen. The inventory management gaps, the customer follow-up failures, the staff development issues, the potential that Owen Birch and Amber represented that wasn't being utilized. She outlined what she expected to change, and by when, and how it would be measured. Gary nodded throughout. He had managed 11 years, without incident, and he intended to manage 11 more. He understood, without it being said directly, that the previous afternoon's events had contributed to this visit, and he intended to make very sure that certain things were addressed before the next one. "One more thing," Vivienne said near the end. She looked at her notes on her phone. "Your floor manager, Mosley." Gary said, "Nothing. I want him retrained," Vivienne said. "Full customer interaction protocol. Discrimination policy refresher. I want documentation that it's completed within 30 days. She paused. "Not terminated. Retrained. There's a difference." Gary looked at her. "The goal," she said, "isn't to punish him. The goal is to have a floor that every customer walks into and feels like they belong there. That's the standard. That's what we're building toward." "That's all," she said. Derek Mosley sat through his retraining 3 weeks later. It was conducted by an outside consultant hired through HR. It lasted 2 days. He sat in a room with 2 other employees from different properties, and they went through case studies, and role plays, and policy documents. And at some point on the second afternoon, the consultant said something that Derek had heard before but hadn't really heard before. She said, "The assumptions we make about who belongs in a space, who looks like a buyer, who looks like they can afford something, those assumptions cost us more than we realize. They cost us the sale. They cost us the relationship. And they cost the person standing in front of us something they can never get back." Derek thought about a green jacket and a canvas tote bag and the way a woman had looked at him, not with anger, but with a kind of steady, quiet knowing. He had thought about it a lot over the past 3 weeks. He would think about it for a long time after. Vivienne was back in her office by noon that day, the day of the walkthrough. She had a 2 o'clock call with Alton about a potential acquisition in Nashville, and a 4 o'clock with a nonprofit board she had served on for years. Her afternoon was full. At some point between the 2 calls, her assistant knocked on the open door. "The regional office sent something," she said, and set a report on the corner of the desk. It was the staffing review Leonard Park had compiled. Compensation structures, training records, customer complaint history, the full picture of the Halcourt location. Vivienne opened it, read through it methodically, made a few marks in the margins. There was one page near the back that listed the customer feedback scores for the past 18 months, broken down by interaction type. Floor approach scores, meaning how customers felt about how they were first approached on the floor, had declined steadily over the past 8 months. The comments in the open-ended section used words like dismissed and unwelcome, and twice followed around. She had not been the first. She closed the report. She sat for a moment, looking out her window at the Atlanta skyline, at the city she had built something in, one careful, patient decision at a time. Then she picked up her pen, wrote a single note on a post-it, system-wide floor training. Q4 priority, pressed it onto the corner of her monitor, and she went back to work. There's something that doesn't make the news, that doesn't get the dramatic moment, or the camera angle, or the headline. It's the part that comes after the twist. It's the quiet work of building something better out of what was broken. Vivienne Okafor wasn't interested in a moment. She was interested in a result. By the end of that fiscal year, Halcourt's floor approach scores had climbed to the highest in the region. Amber had been moved to a customer relations coordinator role that fit her better. Owen Birch had been promoted to service director with a compensation adjustment that reflected what he was actually worth. The charcoal gray coupe, after a follow-up process that no longer took 4 days, was sold within 2 weeks of the walkthrough. And somewhere in Atlanta, a 32-year-old floor manager sat with a cup of coffee before the doors opened one morning, thinking about the assumptions you carry into a room and what they cost you. Not everyone gets the lesson delivered so cleanly. Derek Mosley did. Some people, when the correction comes, get defensive. They build a story where they were right and the circumstances were unfair, and the outcome was unjust. Derek didn't do that. He sat with the discomfort of it. He let it change something in him. He would tell people, years later, that it was the most important few days of his professional life. Not because they were comfortable, but because they were true. That's rarer than it sounds. If you've stayed with this story until now, and thank you for that, genuinely, then you probably already know what the takeaway is. But here it is anyway, because some things are worth saying plainly. The person in the worn jacket might own the building. The woman with the canvas tote might hold the paper that your paycheck depends on. But more than that, more than any of that, the person standing in front of you is a person. That's enough. That has always been enough. Respect was never supposed to be conditional on what someone was wearing, or how they arrived, or whether they matched the picture in your head of what a customer is supposed to look like. Vivienne Okafor didn't need the twist to deserve to be treated with dignity. She deserved it when she walked in the side door in dusty sneakers. That's the whole thing. That's the entire lesson. If this story meant something to you, leave it in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're new here, Lineage Tales is where we tell the stories that don't always make the front page, but have never stopped mattering. Subscribe if you want more of them. There's always more, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one nobody thought to ask.